Sophia's mother slapped a $10 million check into my hand, telling me to leave Sophia. I didn't hesitate for a second. 5 years I'd been by Sophia's side. I gave her the best years of my youth. 10 million really wasn't that much, considering. Word got back to Sophia fast. That day, she skipped her most important meeting, rushed to the airport, shouting my name over and over through the crowd. 49 times, each shout filled with despair, but got no response. By the time Sophia reached the apartment she'd bought for me, I was packing. What is the meaning of this? Sophia's face was grim. Knowing her as long as I had, I could tell she was furious. Ms. Morgan, I began, trying to keep my voice steady despite feeling pathetic. $5 million to break up with you. Is that so hard to understand? Predictably, that enraged her even more. She practically spat the words through clenched teeth. Leave now, and don't you dare regret it. With that, Sophia slammed the door and left first. Truthfully, Sophia had been good to me over the years, materially speaking, of course. She kept me like some pretty boy toy, luxury cars, designer watches. She never skimped. And if I'd stayed with her, it would have been worth far more than that 10 million in the long run. But I was tired of it now. If I hadn't recently heard that Daniel was coming back from abroad, I might have almost forgotten my place. I was just a substitute. Daniel was Sophia's fiancé, the socially suitable match her mother, Mrs. Morgan, had always favored for the Morgan family. Driven by some mix of spite and efficiency, I finished packing in less than half an hour. After leaving the apartment, I had nowhere to go, so I ended up at my friend Mike's place. Unfortunately, his new girlfriend was there too. Watching the lovey-dovey couple made me feel distinctly like a third wheel. Mike looked at me apologetically. I hadn't called ahead, after all. So, I took the hint and checked into a hotel. It was a hotel Sophia and I used to frequent. Sometimes, after drinking too much at work functions, we'd get a room there to sleep it off nearby. Sophia could hold her liquor incredibly well. She rarely lost composure in front of others. But when she did get truly drunk, nobody could handle her except me. Her secretary always called me whenever Sophia had too much. While checking in, the receptionist recognized me. She smiled and asked, "Is Ms. Morgan not with you today?" I shook my head and stated plainly, "Ms. Morgan and I are no longer together." She seemed surprised I could say it so casually and looked a bit embarrassed. After all, everyone in their social circle knew about Sophia and me. Sophia, the renowned single female CEO, and me, just the paid pretty boy kept around to amuse her. Once checked in, I poured myself a drink and blasted my favorite heavy metal music to unwind. Sophia hated rock music, always said it was too loud. Whenever I was with her, it was always her preferred soothing melodies. But now, sipping expensive liquor and listening to the roaring music, something felt missing. I holed up in the hotel for 3 whole days until Mike came looking for me. Mike knew about the breakup and had even taken time off with his girlfriend, planning a trip to help me clear my head. But the day before we were supposed to leave, an emergency came up at Mike's company. The planned buddies' getaway quickly turned into a solo trip. So, I ended up going alone to Austin, Texas. Just as I boarded the plane, Sophia called. It rang for a long time, until the flight attendant reminded me to turn off my phone for takeoff. Right before I switched it off, a text from Sophia came through. "I'm only saying this once. When you're done throwing your tantrum, come back." Staring at that short line, I suddenly remembered something from 4 years ago. It was 4 years ago, after I'd been with Sophia for a year, that I first learned about Daniel. That night, I got very drunk and threw a fit at her for the first time. She was in her study working, sitting behind her large desk, focused on a video conference call with people overseas, coolly captivating. I came back plastered from a bar. Sophia never allowed interruptions when she was working. But that night, emboldened by alcohol, I wrapped my arms around her slim waist. I leaned down, kissed the sensitive spot on her collarbone, and petulantly asked if work was more important than me. She was genuinely angry that night. She looked up, her gaze icy. "I'll say it again. I'm working. Get out." I tried to persist, but she called her bodyguards, who threw me out. Honestly, I regretted it the moment I was outside the mansion. The residential area was remote, practically deserted late at night. Plus, my phone was dead. I was just asking for trouble. Just as I was lighting my 15th cigarette by the roadside, Sophia came out looking for me. Her expression wasn't pleasant. She walked towards me wearing only a thin strap silk nightgown. "Are you done with your tantrum?" I took a drag from the cigarette brand she hated, about to say something defiant, but sneezed instead. I must have looked ridiculous because Sophia couldn't help but laugh. For the first time, she reached out her hand to me, but back then, my pride was too high, and I stubbornly pushed it away. Her hand hung in midair, and she got truly angry then. She turned her head slightly, looked at me and said, "I'm saying this one last time. When you're done, come back." She meant it. After saying that, Sophia turned and walked away. I called after her, "Give me my car keys. Ethan, I bought you that car. If you're not planning on coming back, you can forget about taking it." In that moment, I suddenly understood the nature of my relationship with Sophia. The watch I wore, the car I drove, the designer clothes, all bought by her. Seeing I said nothing, Sophia turned back again, stood there and held out her hand. From that time on, I became extremely obedient, staying by Sophia's side. And I stayed for 5 years. I put my phone away and deleted the message. The flight took 2 hours, and I landed at Austin Bergstrom International Airport. Bad luck struck soon after landing. My wallet was gone. At the police station, the Austin cop eyed my expensive designer clothes from head to toe, his look seeming to say, "Who else would they steal from?" The language barrier, no money, no valid ID, I couldn't prove who I was. The police officer pushed a phone towards me, telling me to call someone. My parents died in an accident when I was very young. My grandmother raised me, but she passed away before I could give her a comfortable life. The year my grandmother died was when I met Sophia. She was like a ray of light piercing through my dark life. Reluctantly, I tried calling Sophia. International call after call went unanswered, the dial tone reminding me that the light that once illuminated my life had truly vanished. I didn't remember Mike's number. The police officer sitting across from me was losing patience. It wasn't until mid-afternoon that a young American woman helped me. Her name was Chloe. She happened to be at the station on business and saw me sitting alone and dejected in a corner. Out of kindness to a fellow countryman abroad, she used fluent Spanish to help me communicate with the police. After leaving the station, I got a new phone number, cutting off all ties with Sophia. But occasionally, browsing online, I'd still see news about her. Daniel accompanying her shopping, looking smitten. Her and Daniel standing side by side, looking perfectly matched, cutting the ribbon for a newly opened hotel. Their lavish wedding was supposedly coming soon. I stayed in Austin and became good friends with Chloe. With her help, I managed to get a job at an international trade company with US-Mexico operations. Those 5 years being kept by Sophia felt like they had erased my ability to earn a living. Language difficulties and a demanding job made things tough, but thankfully, Chloe was there to help. Two lost souls adrift in a foreign place, we found solace in each other's company. But nobody tells you that two lonely people huddled together don't necessarily generate warmth. Standing on a balcony with a wide view, I smiled and asked Chloe, "Why did you stay here?" She looked up at me, her eyes filled with deep sorrow. It happened to be the night of a local lantern festival. Lanterns floated across the sky, the warm yellow candlelight illuminating Chloe's sharp features. I learned her story. Coming to Austin for a lantern festival had been her late boyfriend's wish. "Making a wish on a lantern," she said, "is very effective." I knew she must be thinking of him then, but he never made it. He died in her arms. I never believed in deities or fate, but at that moment, I put my hands together and sincerely wished upon the sea of lanterns. I want to forget Sophia. Life went on day by day. Work was busy, and sometimes I had to fend off harassment from my boss. The greasy supervisor was gay and would use work as an excuse to touch me inappropriately and make suggestive jokes. To help me, Chloe came to pick me up from the office once and pointedly introduced me as her boyfriend. After that, the supervisor left me alone, which was a relief. After nearly 2 years in Austin, I suddenly received an assignment from the company. Go back to the US mainland to negotiate a project. A few days later, I packed my things and flew back with several colleagues from the Austin office. As soon as the plane landed, the client company had arranged for someone to meet us at the airport and take us to our hotel. It was the same hotel Sophia used to frequent. I stood at the entrance for a moment, lost in thought. Memories I thought were long buried rushed back like a tidal wave. When I saw that the receptionist handling check-in was someone new, the tight grip I had on my suitcase handle finally relaxed. "Good evening, Mr. Davis, Ms. Morgan." Halfway through check-in, a hurried set of footsteps approached from behind us. My body, which had just relaxed, tensed up again. A familiar fragrance drifted into my nose. It was the perfume I had given Sophia. Sophia didn't usually wear perfume. This scent was one I had personally blended during a phase when I was obsessed with fragrances, reminiscent of the faint, fresh scent of the first flower blooming at dawn. But the entire time I was with Sophia, she had never once worn that perfume. The presence behind me paused for an instant, but very quickly, the scent dissipated into the air. Looking up, I saw Sophia and Daniel, surrounded by a group of people, disappearing around a corner. I knew I might run into Sophia, but I hadn't expected it to be so soon. After all, the project we were collaborating on was with a new company jointly established by the Morgan and Davis families. Still, I held onto a sliver of hope. Our project wasn't significant enough to warrant the direct involvement of the top bosses. Normally, 2 project managers would suffice. At lunchtime, the client company suddenly arranged a dinner meeting. My colleagues urged me to join them in the private dining room at the hotel. Pushing the door open, I saw Sophia seated at the head of the table. Under the glittering chandelier light, Sophia, whom I hadn't seen in 2 years, looked even more radiant and striking. After we sat down, my boss, eager to seal the deal, kept pushing me to toast Sophia. During my 5 years with Sophia, I had attended countless banquets and blocked countless drinks for her. That stopped after I ended up in the hospital with stomach bleeding from drinking too much for her, and the doctor strictly forbade me from drinking alcohol ever again. However, during those years in Austin, I did start drinking again. Alcohol helped me fall asleep quickly during sleepless nights. The wine glass was quickly filled. My boss nudged me, urging me in Spanish, "Ethan, Mr. Davis values this collaboration so much he came personally. You absolutely must make this toast." Through the rim of the wine glass, Sophia's cool gaze swept over me. I stood up, raised my glass, and just as I was about to offer the toast, Sophia spoke. "He can't drink." As soon as she said it, everyone at the table exchanged glances. My colleagues shot curious, gossipy looks my way. Just then, the door to the private room swung open. Daniel walked in, tall and imposing in a bespoke suit, his features sharply defined. As he entered, not just me, but my colleagues froze too. Clearly unaware, they were stunned by how much Daniel resembled me. Daniel, however, remained composed. He smiled politely at everyone. "My apologies for being late." After speaking, Daniel gave me a long, deep look. I had cut the mid-length, slightly artsy hairstyle Sophia used to like, which I'd tied back. Dressed in a casual denim jacket, compared to Daniel, I definitely lacked the look Sophia preferred. Daniel looked at me and spoke, his tone suggesting we knew each other from long ago. "You must be Ethan. You really do look a lot like me." My hand holding the wine glass trembled involuntarily, but I fought to maintain my composure. Finally, I managed to smile too. "Mr. Davis," I said, "perhaps you look a lot like me. Wearing the same hairstyle I used to have, dressed in the brand of bespoke suits I once favored, he looked exactly like my former self." After saying this, I turned to Sophia, who sat silently, her lips pressed into a thin line. I raised my glass towards her with a broad smile. "Ms. Morgan, Mr. Davis, I toast you both." Then, under Sophia's slightly furrowed brow, I drained the glass of red wine. After dinner, I stood by the roadside waiting for Chloe to pick me up. Chloe had returned to the States a couple of months earlier because her mother was ill. But after waiting a while, Chloe hadn't arrived, but a familiar Porsche with a recognizable license plate pulled up in front of me. The window slid down, revealing Sophia's face, half hidden in the interplay of light and shadow. Just like she used to, she commanded, "Get in." But she forgot. I was no longer the obedient Ethan of the past. "Ms. Morgan, thank you, but I'm waiting for someone," I replied. Just as I finished speaking, Chloe's Volkswagen pulled up. Under Sophia's piercing gaze, I got into Chloe's passenger seat. As we drove off, Chloe glanced at the rearview mirror, where the Porsche followed steadily behind. She joked, "Thanks to you. This is the first time I've been tailed by a luxury car all the way." I smiled back at Chloe. "Time to test your driving skills." Chloe met my eyes and slammed on the accelerator. Caught in rush hour traffic, the expensive Porsche lost its advantage. Chloe quickly shook Sophia off our tail. "On the way," Chloe said, "I heard about what happened at the dinner table." She was likely referring to the incident with Daniel and me. It wasn't surprising Chloe knew. The colleagues on this trip with me were also friends with her. I could already imagine them gossiping about me behind my back. I just smiled faintly and said nothing more. After a long silence, Chloe pulled the car over. She looked at me earnestly and said, "If you need help, just ask any time." After that dinner encounter with Sophia, I hadn't seen her for a while. According to office chatter, Sophia was busy with preparations for a new hotel. This new hotel was being built specifically for her and Daniel's wedding of the century. As my colleague mentioned this, they gave me a meaningful glance. I didn't respond, just focused on eating my lunch. Lately, the hotel catering had been serving all my favorite dishes. As for how the hotel knew my preferences, it didn't take much imagination to figure out Sophia had arranged it. A week later, Sophia came looking for me. I had just gotten back from hanging out with Mike and some other friends. After showering and getting ready for bed, the doorbell rang. Opening the door, I saw Sophia standing there. She smelled of alcohol, her eye makeup was smudged, and she swayed slightly in her high heels. The secretary who used to accompany her, Ms. Evans, was with her. Seeing my unwelcoming expression, Ms. Evans spoke awkwardly. "Mr. Harrison, Ms. Morgan had too much to drink. She insisted on finding you. When Sophia drank too much, no one could console her." I understood Ms. Evans' predicament. I used to be the one to handle it. But now we were no longer involved. "Ms. Evans," I said coldly, "Ms. Morgan and I have no relationship anymore." I moved to close the door. Before it shut, Sophia grabbed my wrist. There was a vulnerability in her eyes I'd never seen before. The usually imperious Sophia now looked like an abandoned puppy. She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes and said, "Ethan, please come back." Seeing her like this softened my resolve slightly. Sophia clung to my hand tightly, as if exerting all her strength, shedding her usual pride. But she didn't realize the strength difference between men and women. Even with all her effort, I easily pried her hand off mine. Still, she refused to leave. I looked at Ms. Evans. Ms. Evans was reluctant to call Daniel. Not wanting to put her in a difficult position, I reached into Sophia's pocket for her phone. My index finger accidentally brushed against the fingerprint sensor, and the phone unlocked. It was a fingerprint I had registered years ago when Sophia was in a good mood. Our relationship was good then, and I had tried to do all the things normal couples do. I never expected she hadn't deleted it. Opening her contacts, the number pinned to the top was still my old one. Scrolling down, I found Daniel's number. When the call connected, Daniel recognized my voice, and his initially cheerful tone instantly dropped. After hanging up, I felt dazed for a moment. In the past, I too would feel overjoyed whenever I received a call from Sophia. Daniel arrived quickly, clearly very worried. He was wearing casual loungewear, even house slippers. Seeing the drunk Sophia, his eyes filled with concern. After Daniel left with Sophia, Ms. Evans told me many things. She said Sophia had searched for me for a long time after I left. She said Mrs. Morgan kept pushing Sophia to marry Daniel, but Sophia never agreed. She also mentioned that the apartment Sophia bought for me was kept exactly as I left it, and on several occasions, she had found Sophia passed out drunk there, clutching a bottle. The next day, after a project progress meeting, Sophia cornered me in the underground parking garage. Blocking my path, she asked, "Ethan, do you hate me that much?" I looked at her and said flatly, "Ms. Morgan, please move." I started to walk forward, but she grabbed the hem of my jacket. Her grip was so tight her knuckles turned white. "Ethan," she said, "I looked for you for so long. This time, I won't let you go." Sophia meant what she said. I don't know what she told my boss, but I ended up having to move back into the apartment she had bought for me. Sophia said if I still hadn't changed my mind by the end of the project, she would let me go. Perhaps out of a desire for revenge, or maybe pity. Looking at the stubborn woman before me, I agreed. The Sophia who had always been so high and mighty in front of me had changed. Whenever she wasn't working, she would call me. If I didn't answer, she'd flood my phone with messages. If she encountered something interesting, she'd message me to share it, like a young girl in the throes of first love. Despite the fact I never replied to her messages. As soon as she finished work, she'd rush back to the apartment, even cooking my favorite dishes herself. The Sophia who had never cooked before didn't care about the burn scars on her carefully maintained hands. She'd sit across from me, her eyes shining, waiting for me to eat the food she made. If I said it was good, she'd beam like a child. She resumed her old habit of having piles of the latest luxury watches delivered to the apartment. Daniel sought me out once. We sat facing each other in a coffee shop. The waitress who brought our coffee glanced back and forth between us several times, noting our resemblance. Daniel told me to let go, to stop harassing Sophia. I looked at him, every gesture a shadow of my former self, and laughed. "You know perfectly well it's not me harassing Sophia. It's her, chasing me." Hearing this, Daniel's face turned pale. The moment I saw him, I knew. It wasn't that I looked like Daniel, it was Daniel who looked like me. After a long pause, Daniel asked, "How much money do you want to leave?" How much money to leave? Looking at Daniel, I remembered Mrs. Morgan offering me $5 million to leave Sophia. Mrs. Morgan then and Daniel now looked so similar. I took a sip of coffee and slowly held up one finger. Daniel's tense expression visibly relaxed when he saw the single finger. He scoffed, "Just $1 million? No, $10 million. At my words, Daniel's eyes widened instantly. He sneered, "What makes you think you're worth $10 million? I smiled. When Sophia aborted our child, Mrs. Morgan gave me $5 million to keep my mouth shut. Now, asking for $10 million isn't excessive, is it? Daniel clearly didn't know about this. His face contorted. How many nights had I woken up startled from nightmares, dreaming of tiny, baby-sized hands reaching for me, a blood-covered infant constantly crying in my dreams. Our child, Sophia and mine, aborted without my knowledge. Mrs. Morgan had always turned a blind eye to Sophia keeping me, but a child of the Morgan family could absolutely not have any connection to me. That day, I knelt before Mrs. Morgan for the first time, kowtowing repeatedly, begging her for mercy, even willing to take the child and leave Sophia afterward, just asking her not to make Sophia terminate the pregnancy. Of course, Mrs. Morgan refused. With a wave of her hand, several bodyguards in black suits surrounded me. They pinned my arms and legs, locking me in a room. A shot of anesthetic and I felt nothing. When I woke up, they told me Sophia had already aborted our child. Sophia returned to the apartment a month later. Then, Mrs. Morgan offered me $5 million to leave Sophia because Daniel was about to return from abroad to take over the Davis family business. I couldn't stay by Sophia's side any longer. I agreed so readily that even Mrs. Morgan seemed surprised. She sneered, "I knew it. You stayed with Sophia only for the money. But what choice did I have? I had no power, no connections, no family. Even the child I had so eagerly anticipated was forcibly taken away. If not for this work assignment, I would never have set foot in this city again." When I got back to the apartment from the coffee shop, Sophia had already cooked a full table of dishes waiting for me. I then realized it was my birthday. It was clear Sophia had put a lot of thought into tonight's meal. 8 dishes and a soup, all my favorites. Her delicate hands bore fresh burn marks. The lights dimmed, and Sophia brought out an exquisite cake, singing "Happy Birthday" to me. "Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you." Sophia, who had never celebrated my birthday before, looked in a way that brought me no warmth. I watched her in the candlelight, wondering how she managed to celebrate my birthday while simultaneously preparing for her wedding with Daniel. Sophia pushed the candlelit cake closer to me, her face full of hopeful expectation. "Come on, blow out the candles." Seeing I didn't move, Sophia prompted again. "Hurry, sit down and blow out the candles." Finally, under her eager gaze, I blew them out. When the lights came back on, Sophia pushed a gift towards me. Inside a blue velvet box were 2 delicate matching rings I had bought long ago. I hadn't taken them when I left the apartment, but now, gleaming under the light, the 2 silver rings seemed utterly ridiculous. Sophia asked cautiously, "Want to try them on?" I looked directly at Sophia and slowly asked, "Will you marry me?" Hearing my question, Sophia fell silent. The air grew heavy with unspoken words. She reached out to touch my hand, but I pulled away. Her hand hung awkwardly in the air. Even without her answer, I already knew. Sophia would not give up the alliance with Daniel, let alone marry me. I knew this answer 2 years ago. All she wanted was for me to remain her obedient, kept pretty boy. I looked up at Sophia and said, "Let me give you a gift too." She seemed to know what I was about to say and tried to stop me. "Let's put the rings on first, okay?" Ignoring her, I went into the other room and retrieved a box from the back of a storage closet. Inside that box were all the things I had once joyfully prepared for our unborn child. Clothes and toys, still in their packaging. Seeing the box, Sophia's face turned incredibly pale. She looked away, asking pointedly, "Why are you showing me this?" I pointed to the clothes in the box. "Look," I said, "wouldn't he have looked cute in these? He would have called me daddy, and you mommy, but he would never come back." Sophia picked up the knife and started cutting the cake, but her hand trembled, smudging the words "happiness" iced on top into an unrecognizable mess. "See, we could never be happy." "Ethan," she said, "stop joking. Let's eat the cake first. It's your birthday. Our child is gone. You knew all along. From the moment you aborted the baby behind my back, you knew we could never go back." Sophia's hand finally stopped cutting the cake. She covered her eyes, unable to form a complete sentence for a long time, finally bursting into tears. Looking at the devastated Sophia before me, I suddenly laughed. I stared at her and said word by word, "Or perhaps, you knew from the very beginning that our child could never be kept. Yet, she never told me, letting me anticipate our child's arrival like a fool." 2 years ago, Sophia told me she was going on an overseas business trip. The moment she left, Mrs. Morgan arrived with her people. For over a month, Sophia vanished. Calls unanswered, messages unreturned. And just when I agreed to take Mrs. Morgan's $5 million and leave, Sophia heard the news and rushed back. That day, she even skipped a crucial shareholders' meeting. But none of that could make me forgive her for getting rid of our child behind my back. Sophia looked at me, finally speaking, "I'm sorry. Her voice choked with sobs. She seemed desperate, but the more anxious she got, the less clearly she could speak. The powerful businesswoman, usually so decisive, couldn't form a complete sentence. I looked at Sophia, her eyes red, and laughed through my tears. Sophia, you don't deserve forgiveness. Ever. Leaving the apartment, I walked aimlessly for a long time. As dawn broke, I realized I had wandered to the beach where Sophia and I first met. Back then, my grandmother had just passed away. Following her last wish, I scattered her ashes into the sea. Whenever I missed her, I would come here and sit for hours. That day, a child fell into the water nearby. Without thinking, I ran over and pulled the child out, but a wave knocked me over and pulled me under. As seawater flooded my lungs, I realized I couldn't swim. Just as I thought I was about to die, Sophia appeared. That was our first meeting. Later, she took me to the hospital. When she found out I wasn't trying to kill myself, she saw my poor state and worried about me being alone. So she actually stayed with me at the hospital the entire night. At the time, I didn't know about her background. I just naturally felt this woman was thoughtful and warm, reminding me of how my grandmother would stay up all night with me when I was sick. Soon after, I graduated from college and applied for a job. Unexpectedly, it was her company. However, she offered me a different position, her lover. And just like that, I became her lover. For the first year, Sophia treated me wonderfully. But then I heard about Daniel, the man who looked so much like me. That's when I learned her marriage had been arranged long ago. But I had overstepped the boundaries of a lover, wanting more than just money later on. I wanted a lifetime with one person, a normal family like ordinary people, maybe 1 or 2 lovely children, but none of that was possible. Her family would never allow her to choose her own marriage. Chloe found me sitting by the sea, lost in thought for a long time. By the time the project ended, the hotel built for Sophia and Daniel's wedding was also completed. Chloe and I returned to Austin. Sometime later, news spread online that Sophia and Daniel had called off their engagement. Later, Mrs. Morgan found me, blaming me for ruining the alliance between the Morgan and Davis families. I looked at Mrs. Morgan's furious face and said calmly, "I just told the truth, that's all." Before leaving the coffee shop, I had told Daniel, "Sophia only loves herself." 2 years later, the company I worked for established a branch in the U.S. Due to my consistently good performance and being American, I naturally became the head of the new branch. When I first returned, I was swamped with work. It took 2 months for the company to get on track. One day, I saw a familiar name on a project proposal I was reviewing, Sophia Morgan. I sat stunned in my large office chair for a long time, so long that my secretary had to call my name twice before I snapped out of it. She informed me that the client company had scheduled a meeting to discuss the project at a restaurant that evening at 8 p.m. That night, I took my team to the designated restaurant and once again saw Sophia, whom I hadn't seen in a long time. Actually, it wasn't that long. At least, she frequently appeared on websites I browsed, and on the financial news channels I watched. Over the past 2 years, there had been many reports about Sophia. A single, successful female CEO being frequently reported on for her work was normal. When she saw me, she extended her hand, smiling broadly and brightly. "Long time no see." I lightly clasped her hand. The brief touch of skin sent a jolt through me before I quickly let go. I nodded slightly. "Long time no see." That evening, we acted like true business partners, neither of us bringing up the past. After the business discussion concluded, I finally asked the question that had been weighing on my mind. "Why did you choose our company to partner with?" Sophia chuckled softly. "We had a good experience collaborating with your parent company before. Besides, I'm very optimistic about the prospects of this new project." I remained silent for a long while, until she spoke again. "You didn't think it was because of you, did you?" I was momentarily stunned, then inwardly mocked myself. After all these years, it seemed I was the only one still living in the past. The project took our company and Sophia's about a month to complete. Someone suggested celebrating, saying it was our company's first major project secured by the new branch. Not wanting to dampen the staff's enthusiasm, I agreed. The celebration banquet was held by the beach. Flowers, music, and fireworks created a very romantic atmosphere. That night, feeling happy, I had a couple more drinks than usual. In a hazy state, I thought I heard someone call out, "Ms. Morgan." When I woke up again, I was in a hotel room. Beside me lay a completely naked Sophia. I felt a sense of disorientation. Many years ago, Sophia used to wake up in my arms like this every morning. I thought last night was... No, it wasn't a dream. Sophia and I had really gotten back together. "Morning," Sophia said hoarsely as she opened her eyes and saw me. My lips pressed together tightly. I didn't say anything. I didn't know how to face our current situation. Were we lovers again? Or was it just a one-night accident? Seeing my reaction, Sophia spoke first. "Last night was an accident. Don't worry, we're both adults." I won't hold you responsible. My mouth opened, feeling a surge of anger. Before I could speak, Sophia had already dressed and left the room, not giving me another glance the entire time. My relationship with Sophia seemed to have plunged back into freezing point. Since that night, we both consciously avoided contact. 2 months later, Chloe called me. She said she was at the hospital and had seen Sophia at the OB/GYN clinic. Chloe had returned to the States earlier than me because of her mother. She had recently found out she was pregnant herself and was there for a regular checkup when she unexpectedly ran into Sophia. Sophia hadn't seen her, but Chloe felt uneasy and thought she should tell me. My mind flashed back to events from years ago. I said nothing, hung up, and immediately dialed Sophia's number. It rang for a long time but went unanswered. I got in my car and sped directly to the hospital Chloe mentioned. After running 3 red lights, I finally found Sophia in the hospital. She was holding a freshly printed report. I clearly saw the words on it, pregnancy, for weeks. My eyes turned red. I grabbed Sophia's hand tightly and demanded, "Are you planning to get rid of the baby behind my back again this time? Are you the patient's family? The baby is developing well. She's here for a checkup. You're going to scare the expectant mother like this." The doctor sitting across from them spoke, bringing me back to my senses. I looked at Sophia beside me in astonishment. "You were just here for a checkup?" Sophia looked back at me, her eyes red, and nodded. "This time," she choked out, "I'll have our baby." My hand holding hers trembled. Then her hand gripped mine tightly. I knew, then, that she and I were truly getting a fresh start.